Please notice that in this particular game between Yilmaz with white and Kulauts with black, both sides played in typical modern fashion, bringing the rooks to the queen side, which makes a lot of sense because that's probably where the main battlefield will be. Here, what white played was the move knight b3. It might look a bit unnatural to retreat a knight from the center. However, what white is preparing to do here is a4 followed by a5, softening up black's kingside defenses. This plan would probably change the situation on the queen side on long term, so black should carefully consider the reply here. In the game, black played a passive move bishop a8. I think that the move d5 was called for here. This is probably a very good occasion to play d5. You can notice that after e takes d5, e takes d5, white wouldn't be able to play c5, the typical reaction here, because they don't have sufficient support on the c5 square. Black would just win a pawn. So probably after d5, white would have to take with the other pawn instead, c takes d5. And after e takes d5, knight takes d5. In this way, let's say knight takes d5, white could first take on c8 in order to temporarily displace one of the heavy pieces in black's camp. After rook takes c8, e takes d5. It appears as if white has won a pawn here, but by means of the move knight f6, probably black is getting back that pawn. They could probably take that pawn next turn. So this is probably what black should have played here after knight b3. This was a good moment to play the typical counter blow d5. Also notice that the pawn on b4 is a bit loose, which suggests that perhaps earlier on white should have played the prophylactic move a3 like Kasparov did. Anyway, in the game after knight b3, black played bishop a8, and white hurried to play their plan here, a4. Now if black plays a5, as you can see after b takes e5, b takes e5, white would have a very nice move here, knight b5. In this way, they are not only targeting the pawn on d6, but also the pawn on a5 has become a bit loose here. So this is probably unplayable for black. In the game, they tried queen f8 instead. And what do you think white played at this moment? Which do you think would be white's best choice here? Of course, white simply continues with their plan here, a5. Very strong move, so that after b takes a5, knight takes a5. White has improved their pawn structure, and they now have the idea of creating a passed pawn, either by b5 or perhaps c5, depending on black's play here. This is a very nice square for the knight, by the way. In the game, black tried bishop d8. There was a threat of bishop a7 winning the exchange, so black played bishop d8 here, so that if bishop a7, they would be ready to play bishop b6 check. However, white has no reason to be that cooperative. In the game, they played here knight a4. Very nice knight duo on the queen side. They are controlling a lot of squares, these knights. Now the threat of bishop a7 is renewed. Black tried knight p6, swapping some pieces. However, after knight takes p6, bishop takes p6, bishop takes p6, rook takes p6. White had prepared a very strong positional sacrifice here. Can you see which sacrifice white had prepared here? Exactly. Very nice move, e5. In this way, white is swapping the pawn on d6 so that c5 will become possible. After d takes e5, white continued with c5. Actually, this is not a sacrifice because once the black rook moves away, white is ready to take the pawn on a6. That's how the game went. And later on, white went on to win here thanks to their very strong connected passed pawns. If we go back to the beginning, what we have seen here is that white noticed the possibility of going a4, a5, supported by the knight, and for that reason they played here knight b3. Possibly black should have tried here the move d5 in order to create counterplay. However, in the game they played the passive move bishop a8. White carried out the plan a4, a5. Very nice strategical idea in the hedgehog for white. Now let's have a look at black's modern plan involving the h-pawn advance. Here in this game between Golizade with white and Nguyen Huyn Min Hui with the black pieces, black hurried to play the move h5. By the way, when I wrote my book about the Sicilian Khan, I noticed that this plan was really useful on many occasions, and here we can see it performed in very nice fashion by the Vietnamese grandmaster. White played here queen f2. Please notice that if white plays something like h4, trying to prevent a further march of the h-pawn, well, in that case, black would be very happy to play here knight e5. The reason is that later on, whenever white plays f4, black would be able to play knight g4. For example, let's say white plays here b3, protecting the pawn on c4. Black plays something like bishop a8, typical prophylactic move here. If white now plays f4, black is very happy about playing knight g4 because that knight could never be expelled from g4 since h4 has already been played. There is no h3 anymore. So that explains why white, after the move h5, is not very happy to play h4, because black would play knight e5 without a blink here, knowing the idea of meeting f4 with knight g4. In the game, they played here instead queen f2, and black played here bishop d8. This is a clever move because not only are we protecting the pawn on b6, just in case, but also our rook gets some more air along the e-file, so whenever we play d5 later on, the e-file will be opened for our rook. So that's the idea behind the move bishop d8. Just for the record, after the move h5, had white played instead bishop g5, well, actually black would play h4 anyway. Since if bishop takes h4, we would have a little tactical trick here. I'm sure you can see it. Of course, knight takes e4. In this way, we are exploiting the fact that the bishop on h4 is unprotected. So whenever white takes back on e4, we will just take on h4. Anyway, back to the game. h5, queen f2, black played bishop d8, useful move. And after b4, white continues with a typical expansion on the queen side. Black played here knight e5. It was also interesting to play h4, by the way. Here you can see this plan carried out in perfect fashion. If white plays here queen takes h4, we will hurry to play knight takes e4, exploiting the fact that the queen is now attacked. On the other hand, after h4, if white plays, let's say, knight a4, well, black could then play h3, softening up the whole long diagonal here for the bishop. So if g takes h3, knight e5, white should be very careful at this point. For example, they cannot play here blindly for their queenside attack with knight b3, attacking the pawn on b6, because in that case, black is ready to strike in the center. Knight takes f3. Fantastic attack for black. As you can see, white cannot take back on f3 because that will follow bishop takes e4. Back to the game. After b4, knight e5, white played here knight b3. And here, black noticed that the time was right for the typical d5 push. Black played here d5. What's the point with d5? Well, it turns out that if white takes twice on d5, let's say c takes d5, e takes d5, and e takes d5, well, in that case, black would be ready to play here knight eg4. And the thing is that after f takes d4, knight takes d4, black has several threats at the same time. Not only we are threatening the queen, also we are threatening to give mate, and also the bishop on e3 is hanging. So that's too much for white to handle. This explains why in the game, after the move d5, white instead took on d5. After c takes d5, e takes d5 with the knight. Knight takes d5 in order to avoid this tactical situation. However, after bishop takes d5, here white played rook takes c8 in order to deflect the black queen from the h2 b8 diagonal. But even so, after e takes d5, again black was ready for their typical tactical trick. I'm sure you can find it. What did black play here? Of course, knight eg4. And it turns out that after f takes d4, knight takes d4, black is going to get back the bishop on e3 straight away. After queen d2, black noticed that the most powerful way of recapturing was with a rook, so that we're attacking the knight on b3, and at the same time we're preparing to play bishop g5 with new threats. After knight d4, bishop g5, white tried a last chance here with d6. And in the game, black played rook e5 and went on to win. However, it was possible to finish off white at this moment. Can you see black's fantastic tactical resource here? Correct. Black can play here a very nice move, rook d3. It turns out that white cannot take on d3, because in that case they run into knight f2. And after king g1, knight takes d3, rook takes d3, all black would have to do here is to pick up the pawn on d6. And that could be arranged by means of queen d7. No matter what white plays here, let's say something like knight f3, black would be able to pick up the pawn, bishop f4, later on take on d6 with a huge advantage. So the move rook d3 would actually win the game, because white cannot take and they cannot play anything else either, because, well, black is threatening to just take on d1 and white could not take back due to the fork on f2 again. Summing up, if we go back to the beginning, what black did here was to use the modern idea of pushing the h-pawn forward. Harry the h-pawn, as they say. h5, and after queen f2, black played bishop d8, prophylactical move, and after the move b4 in the game, they played here knight e5. With a very strong initiative, as you can see, the move h4, h3 is coming up next. And they could even have considered here, by the way, to play h4 straight away. As we saw, h3 is in the air, and if white plays h3 themselves, well, in that case, as you can see, the square on g3 has become a bit weak, and black could exploit that by means of knight h5, going for knight g3. So if you play the hedgehog with the black pieces, please don't forget this little plan of pushing the h-pawn. It might become very useful. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thanks a lot. You can add your comments below. Thanks again and see you next time.